Ukraine and the United States sign a long-sought minerals deal. What does it mean for relations between the two countries? And how might it contribute to ending Ukraine's conflict with Russia? Hello, I'm Anton, and this is The Heat. After months of negotiations, Ukraine and the United States have finally signed a minerals and hydrocarbons deal. Could this mark a turning point in the conflict? CGTN's Jeff Moody has this report.
The faces are sombre, but the significance of this moment is huge. The US, now with a financial stake in Ukraine, a stake with the potential to influence the outcome of the conflict that has dominated European politics for the last 3 years.
This partnership allows the United States to invest alongside Ukraine to unlock Ukraine's growth assets, mobilize American talent, capital, and governance standards that will improve Ukraine's investment climate and accelerate Ukraine's economic recovery.
The Americans, under a president who values the art of the deal, now have skin in the game, a financial incentive, and many in Ukraine are broadly pragmatic.
If there is a result after Ukraine gives away its resources to the US and there is a ceasefire, as Putin promised, then let them take the minerals.
The deal has an advantage because I've heard that we'll receive weapons, and it's very important for our army. And maybe in the future there will be certain advantages in cooperation with the United States.
That cooperation sets up a joint investment fund to help Ukraine pay for military aid, humanitarian aid, and for the reconstruction of the country once the conflict is over. In return, the US will take a share in the sale of critical materials like lithium and graphite used to make EV batteries, as well as rare earth metals used in smartphones. Ukraine has around 5% of the world's total reserves of critical rare earths. It's easy then to see why the US has been so keen to get the deal across the line.
So at first, United States need the economical side, the money side of the deal. And secondly, they really need these minerals because not a lot of countries in the world can mine such minerals. And United States don't have a lot of partners who can also provide them with these rare earths.
This brings to an end weeks of tense negotiations. Who can forget this exchange between the two presidents when a deal looked further away than ever before?
You're playing cards. You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III.
The diplomacy has been intense, culminating in an historic meeting last week between Trump and Zelensky on the sidelines of the Pope's funeral. But no sooner is the ink dry on one deal than all eyes turn to another, bigger deal, the deal to end all deals, an agreement with Russia to end the conflict in Ukraine. And that deal is still anything but certain. Jeff Moody, CGTN.
To discuss this and more, let's bring in our guests. Joining us from Dallas, Sergiy Kudelia is an associate professor of political science at Baylor University. Here in the studio, William Lawrence is a professor of political science and international affairs at American University. And in Washington, D.C., Anton Fedyashin is a professor of history at American University. Thanks, everyone, for being with us. Anton, it's taken some time. There have been long negotiations over this deal, but now they've signed it, and we'll see what happens next. But how significant is it? And do you think it will go some way towards resolving the conflict between Russia and Ukraine?
Well, this deal, Anand, is definitely a tactical victory for President Zelensky, because if you look at the drafts of the previous deals, especially the ones that the Americans tabled, this deal, it's the document that was released today is fairly short. It's about 11 pages long. This deal is a lot less predatory and extractionist than what the Trump administration had been proposing earlier, where the Americans would have total control over essentially the earth of Ukraine. That's the optimistic view. So the Zelensky administration did well. Now, the pessimistic view of this same document is that it is only a tactical victory for Ukraine, because the essence of this document is that it sets up an investment fund that will only become operational after the war is over. And therefore, if the Trump administration chooses to use this document as a lever to move the Ukrainians towards the negotiating table with the Russians, then that's what the Trump administration will do. It will say, listen, you are not going to see a single penny of American money, because no one in their right mind is going to invest in any kind of building in Ukraine as long as there is the danger of a missile destroying it. Therefore, hurry up, rescind your decree that forbids you and all of your officials from negotiating with the Russians. Sit down at the negotiating table and let's get this show on the road. So we'll see which of these two sort of tracks the Trump administration takes. But this is the first step, although by no means a guarantee that we'll start moving towards peace.
Okay, Sergiy Kudelia, what do you make of it? I mean, this deal includes, as Anton pointed out a moment ago, a reconstruction reinvestment fund which will go towards rebuilding Ukraine after the war has ended. It also absolves Ukraine from its previous debt to the United States. But significantly, there is no security guarantee in this deal. What's your view?
Yes, I think it's a very important political achievement for the Ukrainian government. Because in this agreement that was publicized a few hours ago, we see a lot of important statements coming from the Trump administration reaffirming their strategic partnership with Ukraine. This is really the first formal document where the new administration confirms that it sees Ukraine as a strategic partner and argues that there is a strategic alignment that exists between the United States and Ukraine, and that the United States recognizes many other contributions that Ukraine made in the past to the international security, including giving up nuclear weapons. So from the political side, this political component is extremely important. Now the United States, initially we remember the Trump administration tried to position itself as an impartial mediator between Russia and Ukraine. Now we clearly see that the United States again tries to position itself as a strategic ally of Ukraine. And in this document, we see a number of references to Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Again, the language that initially the Trump administration was not willing to make. A note of caution, however, to what we've heard from Anton, and that is we only see part of the agreement. The other part is called a limited partnership agreement, where all the details about the sharing of revenues are. And exactly there you can see which of the parties have a greater control over that investment fund. We don't really know what's in that limited partnership agreement. And so from this standpoint, I think from the economic standpoint, it's too early to say whether Ukraine ultimately managed to get a successful deal out of these negotiations.
Right. Sergiy, just one point. When you talk about a strategic partnership, when you talk about strategic allies, what does that mean in practical terms?
In practical terms, it means that the United States is committed to Ukraine's security, sovereignty, independence, and democracy. And it emphasizes this idea that for Ukraine to successfully reconstruct and modernize economically, it has to remain committed to democratic norms. And that is a broader set of strategic goals that the United States and Ukraine have in common.
William Lawrence, good to have you in studio with us. You know, as Sergiy Kudelia was telling us, this will be seen as a strategic partnership, but there is no formal security guarantee from the United States. I mean, Washington's view is that its investments in this mining deal, its involvement in it will act as a deterrent, you know, to prevent any further kind of aggression from Russia. What do you think?
Well, everything that the other guest said and that you said is possible. It's very hard to be, you know, absolutely positive as you game this out which way it'll go. But I would say the following. First of all, the U.S. is using new language, as the other guests have said, that we haven't seen before, including on security guarantees. And the main security issue was whether or not they'll be joining NATO. And there even seems to be sort of a nice sort of settling of that issue, you know, within the context of this agreement, and that maybe not NATO for now. You know, they can join the EU, but NATO maybe push that off to the future after some rearrangement. And like with any agreement, it could go for a period of time and then drop out. I think the most significant thing here in terms of the duration of the war and whether we get to a ceasefire is this could actually prolong, not accelerate, but prolong the negotiations towards an ending of the Ukraine war, because actually now Ukraine is in a stronger position than it was before. And one of the reasons they were precipitating towards greater concessions to the United States was all of this pressure they were getting, as Washington seemed to be siding with Moscow. And now that burden is off a little bit. That said, you know, the Ukrainians will be able to negotiate when they're ready, you know, towards what the Russians call this the Korean solution, the frozen conflict. They're not recognizing, but just giving up a certain number of things. And I found it very significant also that there's no limits on the size of the Ukrainian army and some other things that could have been part of a deal that would have put Ukraine in a weaker position. That's not the deal we saw today.
But William, isn't this deal then meaningless if there's no peace deal?
Yes, on some level, it's a reconstruction deal, and you can't reconstruct, you know, in a war. But it's not meaningless in all the other ways your other guests said. That it's politically a huge achievement, and even a small or partial realignment of the U.S. position towards what I would call a more neutral position. You know, Trump's been saying for days and weeks now he's just neutral and he just wants a deal. But this is one of the moments, and there haven't been many over the last 100 days, where we really saw a Trump position closer to Rubio's position. And don't forget, Rubio just became the acting national security advisor, it seems, and he's you know, Cuban, American, not very pro-Russian, and secretly pro-Ukrainian, and that's going to also be something to watch.
Anton, I mean, looking at how this agreement will be implemented, I mean, it will take years, if not decades, for these investments to bear fruit. There was an opinion piece on the CNN website which says that this deal is largely symbolic. It says, and I'm quoting here, Ukraine needed to show its relationship with this White House was functional and improving. And of course, that's in the context of the fact that there was that very ugly blow-up in the Oval Office not so long ago. So is it largely symbolic?
It is largely symbolic. Now, symbolism matters in politics. It just doesn't matter in wars, because part of the problem for the Ukrainians is that they devoted so much time to fighting this war as a PR action and a struggle over narratives. And sooner or later, that simply stops carrying the day. And what actually matters is the economy that is feeding your army and how your army performs. And what we're seeing on the battlefields is, unfortunately for Ukraine, a constant, uninterrupted retreat almost along the entire line of contact. And this agreement will do absolutely nothing to reverse that bitter fact for the Ukrainians. In the future, this may turn into reconstruction aid. But again, that only hinges on an actual peace agreement being struck, on the guns falling silent, and then this will begin to kick in, and that's in the far future.
Okay, let's go to Moscow now. We're joined by Dmitry Babich. He is a journalist and Russian political analyst. Dmitry, great to see you. We're talking about this deal that was signed between the United States and Ukraine, the minerals deal, the hydrocarbons deal. It was announced by the United States Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent. So let's listen to some of what he had to say.
Today's agreement signals clearly to Russian leadership that the Trump administration is committed to a peace process centered on a free, sovereign, and prosperous Ukraine over the long term. It's time for this cruel and senseless war to end.
So, Dmitry, what is your view on this agreement and what it could do to bring peace between Ukraine and Russia?
Well, it sounds very nice what Mr. Besant is saying. So if we could really achieve peace, thanks to that agreement, I would only be happy. But experience shows first that agreements with the post-Soviet governments, attempts to control any kind of property on their territory by just signing some kind of paper, this hasn't worked before. I mean, Russia, for example, basically bought from Mr. Lukashenko, the president of Belarus, the Belarusian part of a gas pipeline system. And we haven't heard anything about it after that agreement was signed, because if it's the territory of Belarus, if it's their self-sovereign territory, they have a lot of tools to make themselves masters of that territory. In the same way with Ukraine, I'm not sure Mr. Trump in the long run will get what he wants, because Ukrainian government has been very, very able to maneuver. There were several agreements signed by Russia, the European Union with Ukraine. We offered a very, very sensible system a few years ago, the so-called cartel, the so-called system that would make the three sides happy. Russia as the provider, Ukraine as the transit, the EU as the beneficiary of gas deliveries from Russia. And it didn't work with the previous government, which was much better than, than the government which is in power in Ukraine right now.
Okay.
However, if Mr. Trump, thanks to that agreement, can extend a little bit his peace efforts, I think that would be nice, because what Mr. Trump is doing is not perfect, but it's much better than what Mr. Biden has been doing.
Yeah.
Biden has just been feeding that war by supplying more weapons and more economic aid to Kiev.
Yeah.
And that just kept the war going.
Okay, Sergiy Kudelia, insofar as the conflict is concerned, does it, as William pointed out a moment ago, put Ukraine in a little bit of a better negotiating position now?
For sure, and I want to add another important element in this agreement, and that is the agreement provides a clear mechanism by which the United States government will be compensated for its further future military assistance to Ukraine.
Right.
So the amount that the United States will provide for Ukraine in terms of military assistance, by that amount there will be an increase in the capital contribution into the reconstruction fund. In other words, the control of the reconstruction fund will be to a greater extent with the United States. And so that offers an explanation for many voters among Trump followers that question whether this military assistance to Ukraine needs to continue. Trump administration can now say that Ukraine will actually be paying for the future military assistance through the use of its natural resources. And another element that has not been discussed is that actually this agreement comes into force right after it's going to be ratified by the Ukrainian parliament and the American side. Once the exchange of notes are done, the agreement comes into force. And that is the Ukrainian government can now issue licenses and permits to U.S. companies who are interested in establishing their presence in Ukraine. And so in that sense, you should not really wait until the war ends for the agreement to have a direct effect on the Ukrainian economy.
Right. William, as Sergiy says, this will be ratified by the Ukrainian parliament. There will be an exchange of notes. It will be approved here in Washington as well, but it's not sanctified by any kind of formal treaty, is it? I mean, in a few years, we're going to have a different U.S. president, and probably Ukraine's going to have a different president as well. And then we start going into this big debate of how both sides interpret the deal, and it could be very different.
Yeah, all that's at stake, and as a former diplomat, I can say executive agreements are better in the short term, but worse in the long term than treaties, which sort of lock the U.S. into a more, let's say, sustainable or durable position. But there's just so many variables, it's so hard to tell. If I could just throw out another data point here, about 40% of the rare earths are in the occupied part of Ukraine. And there are other aspects of this that aren't really, fully in view. But I agree entirely with what Sergiy, I think his name is, said about the momentum of getting U.S. businesses involved, because they're often, I know the Libya case very well and some of these others, where you can get companies going in long before you actually have peace deals or peacekeepers or any of that sort of thing, planning, making arrangements. And let me say one other thing that's not really being discussed on the rare earth side, which is that Trump's talking about ocean bottom rare earths, the Greenland rare earths. I mean, there are rare earths all over the world. They're not as rare as people think. It's a cost issue. And so if Ukraine can make it cost effective, the companies and the U.S. government behind them will do a lot of these things. But if the rare earths become available in other locations, then the reconstruction of Ukraine will have to be reconfigured again, another variable, which we just can't tell now where that's going to go.
Anton, William raises an interesting point here, and that is the fact that there are significant amounts of these minerals that we're talking about in those occupied 4 provinces, those provinces occupied by Russia. I mean, there's things like titanium, zirconium, rare earths right there as well. Does that give Russia something of a better leverage in negotiations?
Well, I don't think it gives it any better leverage than the fact that these territories have now been entered into the Russian constitution. So whether they have rare earths or not, that will be irrelevant to President Putin. It does create a problem for the Ukrainians in terms of talking how much of the rare earths they can actually give access to the Americans. Moreover, not everyone is entirely clear about exactly how much of which rare earths there are in Ukraine. So companies, before investing, will insist on performing geological surveys. This is something that gold mining companies do. They do it regularly. They do it even on the territory of the United States, which is by no means geologically unexplored, but this is how business works. So no one's going to drop trillions of dollars into Ukraine just because the Ukrainian government says that they have 5% or 7% or 3% of the Earth's, the planet's resources of titanium or anything else. So again, this is a very long-term process. I think that this is most important between the Americans and the Ukrainians. I don't think that this will have much of an effect on Russian decision-making. I think what happens on the battlefields will be the decider there.
Sergiy, very quickly, there's another complication in all of this, and that is Ukraine already has a strategic raw materials partnership with the European Union. How will that be impacted when the United States gets involved?
So the European Union actually is mentioned in this agreement at the very beginning of this agreement, and there is an emphasis there that anything that contains with anything that is provided by this agreement should not go into conflict with Ukraine's obligations to the European Union in the context of its integration. And so in that sense, yes, U.S. companies will receive certain rights for development of certain natural resources, but at the same time, the Ukrainian government recognizes that it has certain obligations to European companies and will make sure that there is no contradiction between the two.
Right.
And I think that this has, the fact that it's explicitly mentioned in the agreement will allow us, in case of any disputes or conflicts, to ultimately resolve them to the satisfaction of Ukraine and American companies.
Right. Dmitry, while all of this has been going on, Russia has announced a 3-day ceasefire from May 8th to May 10th in honor of Victory Day to commemorate the huge role that the Soviet Union played in defeating the Nazis. The fact that they've announced a 3-day ceasefire, what does that tell us?
Well, I think it's another opportunity to stop this madness, which is called war. But we know that there was actually no reaction from Kiev. Mr. Zelensky has just repeated that his offer is just to stop fighting for 30 days and then see what happens. Well, I think the number one issue is negotiation, starting real negotiation between Russia and Ukraine, maybe with mediation by the United States. But I think this 3 days ceasefire offers a good opportunity to start negotiation. Unfortunately, we haven't heard a positive response from Kiev, but we have constant pressure from Mr. Trump and his surrounding. The Secretary of State Rubio and others, they are basically pressuring Ukraine to provide some progress.
Right.
I think the best progress would be the start of negotiation on a realistic platform, such as recognizing Crimea as Russian and recognizing that the return to the 1991 borders, borders from the year 1991 is just not feasible. Basically, despite the tone of the mainstream press in the West, Russia is interested in peace, and it's not coincidental that our president offered the ceasefire during the Easter celebrations, and now it's the second time that he does it. I think it's an opportunity that should not be missed or dismissed as fake.
William, just got a little bit of time left, but talking about the relationship between the United States and Russia, on the social media platform Truth Social, which is owned by Donald Trump, he says, and I'm quoting him here, "It makes me think that maybe he," referring to Putin, "doesn't want to stop the war. He's just tapping me along and has to be dealt with differently through banking or secondary sanctions." The tone and the substance of this relationship appears to have changed.
Yeah, I mean, Trump, as we know, having watched him now for 4 years and 100 days, often reflects whoever the last person he talked to. So clearly a Rubio or a more pro-Ukrainian advisor probably gave him some information that indicated that, once again, as he's told from time to time, Putin isn't helping. And it's the evolution I've seen sort of bringing together the last couple of weeks at Trump is that he's been inching from what I would call a very pro-Russian position, evidenced by the 4 long meetings by Witkoff with Putin, and that we don't really replicate that on the other side that way, culminating in a sort of like a George W. Bush type, I saw his soul, sort of situation. Whereas now it seems Trump is inching towards a more neutral position.
Okay, and that is where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anton in Washington.
The nature of business is to bring value. Business activities in Europe, Asia, and the U.S. reach consumers globally. Trade, manufacturing, energy, high-tech, real estate, consumption. We give an expanded view on global business and how it covers, influences, or relates to the whole world. Global business, only on CGTN.